case the chief is still going? Does the state have any more witnesses?
Yes, we would like to call Amelia to the stand, please.
Right. Prosecutor, has Amelia been deposed?
Yes, she has.
Amelia, do you understand that you are still under oath from your previous deposition testimony?
Yes.
And that you will be expected to testify truthfully in this proceeding?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Prosecutor. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you please state and spell your name for the record? Amelia, Emilia. And what is your relationship to this case? I was the lady in waiting to Desdemona during our time in Cyprus. I also ran into Iago, another witness in this case. And what is the exact nature of your relationship to Desdemona? Yes, she and I always knew who she was just because we ran in similar circles. But she and I was her lady in waiting when we went to Cyprus. And we got very close during our time there, especially on the boat ride over. We had many hours to stay up and talk, and we really got to know each other very well. I was in charge of watching over her our entire stay, and I care about her very much. Given how much time you spent with Desdemona, what is your opinion of her? Well, she is definitely one of the most wonderful young women I've ever had the privilege of meeting. Very kind, just very sweet, very easy to be around. But she was young. She's younger than I am, and she is fairly naive. She still has a lot of growing up to do and a lot to learn. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's just the way she is. And what about her husband? How did you feel, or what was your opinion on Othello? Right. Well, I never saw them together until we arrived in Cyprus. On our way over, she told me a lot about him and her first impressions of him, his times he spent at Brabantio's house, and everything seemed fine. You know, she spoke of him highly, and when we arrived in Cyprus, things seemed fine as well. But once we got there, in my perspective, it was not a healthy relationship at all. And can you elaborate a bit more about how you felt about the relationship? Right. Well, I definitely saw some remnants of what seemed to me emotional abuse in their relationship. His mood would shift towards her very rapidly. I mean, like I said, once we got to Cyprus, everything seemed fine. He received her well, but the longer we stayed, the harsher his treatment of her became. So, did you believe that their relationship was happy? I think at the beginning it was. I definitely think that there was room for that, but like I said, the longer we stayed in Cyprus, the more clear it became to me that he was not supportive of her. He was not treating her well or respecting her at all. There were several times where she, if not directly revealed to me, she appeared very distressed and very in turmoil about her relationship with him at that time. Did you ever witness or hear Othello insult or demean Desdemona? Yes. In particular, there was one incident where he in fact struck her, hit her, and called her.
Objection, Your Honor. One incident being testified to was repeated.
We're merely asking how the witness viewed the relationship between Othello and Desdemona.
Will respectfully overrule the objection.
Yes, he called her a whore, and that totally perplexed her. That's something that she's not capable of. It's simply not, and she didn't understand why.
So how did Desdemona act or seem after these incidents?
Well, there was a shift. On the boat, things were great, and in our arrival there, this happy, bubbly girl, and in in the days to follow, and especially after that incident, there was a disconnect. She was not always there. You know, it was always on her mind. His treatment of her, trying to work it out and simply just understand why he would do such a thing or treat her in such a way. It was disturbing to see. I was worried, very, very, very worried.
Did you have any idea why he might be being like this? Did Desdemona share something, or did you witness something that clued you in at all?
There was, in fact, a point in time, a conversation in which Othello approached me and asked me about Desdemona's potential for infidelity. He was asking me about her relationship with Cassio, if I had seen anything, or if there was ever a moment where I was away and there was a potential for them to maybe engage in an inappropriate relationship. And in my memory and my experience, no, there was not. I never saw anything that I would judge to be inappropriate.
And you told Othello?
Yes, I did.
Overall, but towards the end of your time at Cyprus, what was Desdemona's general demeanor? How did you described her as very bubbly, and that she was puzzling over these issues? Did she still seem puzzled, or was it something a bit different?
Yes, that attitude of behavior continued and even intensified. In fact, on the day she died, that evening, I was supposed to help her get ready for bed, and in fact, Othello had commanded me to be sent away from her chamber and not help her. And she began to sing a song from her childhood and her conversation with me was very disconnected. Her attention was there, and it was there, and it was there. She wasn't focused. She was completely somewhere else mentally, and I can only imagine that it was concerned with her relationship with Othello.
So, on that, you were discussing the night of Othello's, Desdemona's murder. Can you go into as much detail as what you remember in the events kind of leading up to that?
The actual moment of her death, you mean?
Up until then.
Okay. Yes. Well, that was the same day, I believe, that I, myself, and Iago had the conversation with Desdemona about after Othello called her a whore. And, we continued on our day. Obviously, she was not in good spirits. And then that evening came, and I went to her bedchamber to assist her in getting ready for bed, as I always did. And she told me, like I said, that Othello had commanded her to send me away. And I didn't really understand that. That was new. But I prepared her bed as usual, and this is when she began to sing and just seemed very upset. She began asking me some very interesting questions about the relationship between men and women. And so we engaged in that conversation, and I bid her good night, at which point Othello entered the room, and so I had to leave. And I left the room, and I retired to the courtyard for a moment, and I learned that Roderigo had been killed, which was shocking to me, so I thought Othello might like to know. So I ran back to the bedchamber, and the door was locked, which also was strange. So I tried the door, and I was trying to get inside, and several minutes passed, and I heard some noise inside, but I was so concerned with delivering the news of Roderigo's death. So finally, Othello let me into the room, and I delivered the news, and he asked me if Cassio had also been killed, which he hadn't. It seemed a very specific question to me. But I looked at the bed, and there was Desdemona. She began to stir, and she was kind of mumbling things. I don't really she was she looked very passive. And I asked Othello about this because he was the one who'd been in the room with her, and he looked at me and he said, "'Twas I that killed her."
And that was exactly
Yes.
those words.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
just make sure it's clear. What, after he said that to you, what happened after that?
Well, I continued to ask him why, because there was no reason in mind that I could conceive of. And at that point, several other people came into the room, and my husband was one of them. And so everybody saw Desdemona on the bed, and the whole thing was kind of revealed to everyone. Tensions became very high, obviously. There was the conversation of the handkerchief, which I had no idea that my husband had any involvement in that until then. That became clear to me, finally. And then after that, things grow rather hazy.
So at any point you said you were trying to understand why Othello did he give you any reasons why?
He discussed the accusations of infidelity, which I promptly refuted, because as I told him before, I had seen nothing, and Desdemona did not behave in any way for me to believe that was the case. But other than that, no.
And when you were asking these questions, did Othello, how was he? Did he seem calm, agitated?
Well, no, he was very on edge. He became, I don't know, violent is the word, but something like that, physically charged. He he was about the room. At one point, he came at me. It was very scary. But like I said, everybody was. All this was being revealed. Othello's claim that it was he that killed her. Everyone was trying to understand. So.
Okay. And is there anything else that you remember from right before, obviously? The Ghostbusters.
Well, he came at me, and then my husband charged at me as well. And then after that, I don't remember very much.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
I'd like to begin by going back to the incident described with the handkerchief. So this was a handkerchief that you knew, being familiar with Desdemona, that she prized very highly, right?
Yes.
For what reason did you pick it up?
Well, since we arrived in Cyprus, my husband had continually asked me to see if I could take it from her, get my hands on it. And he wouldn't tell me why, and I wasn't very willing to do anything. I didn't have a very good reason for it at the time, but there was a moment when Desdemona dropped it, and Iago kept pressing me for it, and you live with someone who is threatened by the sheer, you speaking your mind is a threat to him, and you can do nothing right. And it's hard to live with after a while. And I saw the opportunity to take it. And the only thing I could think of was not doing something wrong for once. And so I took it.
So you would say your relationship with your husband was less than tender?
Yes.
Okay. When you gave it to him and he told you what he was going to do with it, what was your response?
Well, he didn't tell me what he was going to do with it. I asked, and he was very indirect about his reasoning for it. And at that point, I didn't feel good about taking it. I didn't want to take it. I knew that it was, I don't know if I really think my husband had any good intention for it, and obviously. But, so I gave it to him, and at that point, there was nothing I could do, and I inquired no further about it.
Was Desdemona ever curious about where we were going?
Yes.
Objection, speculation.
Depends on where you answer. So you go ahead and answer, and we'll let you know if there are one.
Yes.
What was your response when she asked that?
Hold on a second, counsel. I think you need to establish how she knows if Desdemona was curious.
How did she make it known that she was curious?
In the day following, she realized that it was gone. That she always had it with her. It was always something that she knew exactly where it was. And she became very distraught when she discovered that it wasn't there. And I didn't. I was so, I felt bad. I did. I really did. For taking it. I didn't. That I had caused her distress. And so I didn't tell her that I took it or that I knew where it was. I tried to help her look for it. I should have said something.
So even though you had no idea what your husband intended with the handkerchief, you still protected him.
In view of that answer, I'll respectfully overrule prior objection.
Thank you. Now let's go to the night of Desdemona's death. So you were with her previously in the night, you said? On the night, you said that she wasn't all there. Is that correct?
Yes. She just seemed very unfocused. It appeared she had many other things on her mind. There was the beginnings of a storm or a strong wind, and she became very startled at the sound. It made me nervous to watch. I was scared.
Okay, and you left and came back and the door was shut. Now this was a heavy oak door, is that correct?
I suppose, yes, it was heavy.
And you said that you heard thuds or something struggle?
Yes, but not enough that I could pin down exactly what was happening. I just, some words, maybe a thud. I was being as loud as I could to try and get in the room in order to speak to Othello. So I suppose, yes, some sounds.
And you were immediately making your presence known, banged on the door, yelled.
Yes. Yes.
Did the defendant answer the door immediately, or did it take time?
It took some time.
Did the sounds continue past when he came to answer, or did they stop?
After he answered the door?
Yes, as he was coming after he answered the door.
Yes.
What was your first response when he answered?
Well, I had to tell him about Rodrigo, that Rodrigo had been killed.
So you didn't remark on anything that you heard?
No, I did not.
Okay. You then saw Desdemona. You said that she was mumbling or seemed confused. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't know. I don't know about confused. I mean, she was not. She was on the bed, and she didn't seem to be all present. But she was mumbling some things.
In deposition, you said that she tried to make motions to show the defendant's innocence, but you claimed that she was incoherent and dismissed her. Is that correct?
Yes, it was just hard to understand what she was saying. Like, she said falsely murdered at one point, but she was. There was something wrong. Physically, there was something wrong. She wasn't fully forming full sentences.
Did she make any moves to implicate the defendant in her murder?
To be honest, I don't really remember. Falsely murdered. I tried to ask her who had done it. I can't quite remember. I'm sorry. I perhaps had gotten up to the bed and maybe moved to him to ask him what had happened, or maybe closer to the bed. I was probably closer to the bed, yes.
But Othello was at the door, am I correct?
Yes, he was over.
Okay. Now, the defendant's first statements, did he say he was guilty or innocent?
I don't know if those exact words were used. He danced around the question for a moment, but very quickly after that, he looked at me and said, "'Twas I that killed her." He admitted to it.
But in deposition, you said that his first words to you were that he was innocent in the trial. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then, as you said, you changed and said that he killed her.
Yes. But even after that, upon the arrival of other company, he admitted to doing so as well. He looked at Desdemona's uncle and continued with that claim that he had done it.
Did you believe him immediately when he said he was guilty?
I mean, I was just shocked. I couldn't understand why anyone would even want to kill Desdemona. So I tried to uncover it a little bit more, at which point I learned that my husband had some hand in the matter. So I suppose I did. I wanted to know why he did it, why he was claiming to have done so.
So why did you believe that statement instead of the innocence? With these statements, why immediately believe the guilt?
Well, I mean, the whole thing is so shocking. I was completely surprised by, my best friend on her bed murdered, and when her husband, who had not been in favorable behavior towards her in the past few days, looks at me and tells me that he killed her, my immediate reaction is to find out why, not question whether or not he did so.
But when he tells you he's innocent, your reaction is...
But that was not the most immediate thing I had at hand. He looked at me, he said, "'Twas I that killed her," and I wanted to know why.
But there was half a second between the two statements, correct?
Yes, I suppose there was half a second.
Okay. So, would you say that your low opinion of the defendant, coming from the issues, calling her a whore, would have contributed to you believing him outright? What I'm saying is you were more likely to condemn a fellow than to believe his innocence based on your prior knowledge.
Objection. On what are you basing this exactly?
Based on...
Speculating on her perceived bias against...
But based on the witness's prior statements concerning the defendant, I'd like to...
She expressed nothing to indicate that she had bias against Othello, merely that he was acting inappropriate towards someone she cared about.
I'm attempting to establish if those statements constitute bias.
It's okay. I'll overrule the objection. It's cross-examination. You can address this on redirect.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, your dealings with the defendant previously contributed to accepting of his guilt almost regularly.
Well, I like to think that the way I go about life is not looking for reasons to pin the death of my best friend on her husband. I don't think I wasn't looking for that, but I suppose, yes. I mean, I hadn't had the best experience with him in my time there. All I had witnessed to was Desdemona's distress over his behavior towards her, and what she had to say about the way he was treating her. I don't think that I really, that was all still very fresh in my mind, the way he had been treating her. So if he is claiming that he killed her, I would like to unpack that with him a little bit, yes.
Okay. Going back to you talking to the defendant after Desdemona's death, you said this was the first time you learned that your husband was involved.
I mean, obviously I knew that he and Othello spent a lot of time together, so if this had been on the table in the past few days that we had been there, I'm sure that Iago was a part of the conversations that dealt with Desdemona's infidelity. And then there was the handkerchief matter, but he didn't reveal to me then. So when Othello stood there and told me that my husband was the one that gave him permission or grounds to explore these accusations against Desdemona, yes, I was very surprised.
So you weren't involved with your husband's actions outside of taking the
No, absolutely not.
Okay. So at this point, your husband arrived with others. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you try to speak during this time?
Yes. I try, I did. I did speak, yes.
Did your husband encourage you to speak freely, or did he try to silence you?
Not at all.
Not at all. He didn't encourage you to speak.
Oh, no, no, no. He doesn't like it when I speak my mind.
And you said in this deposition that he threatened you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have any concept in your own perception of why he might have tried to threaten you?
Oh, well, but I was speaking my mind, so obviously that was a threat to him. He was intimidated by what I had to say on the matter.
But just your general opinion was a threat to him, or did you have any specific things that you might say that would be a threat?
Oh, well, I'm sure he didn't like the fact that I wasn't on his side. That I would side with someone who I do think is more honorable than he. My best friend, who I was very close to. So yes, I do think that my general opinion on the matter would have agitated him a bit.
Okay. You said that Othello was physically charged. Was Iago as well? Or was he calm?
To be honest, I mean, he was leading me not to speak, to be quiet. I wouldn't describe him as calm. He wasn't, running about the room, though. He was present, I guess is the word I would use.
So he seemed to be composed.
I don't know if any of us were composed. I mean, there was a dead young woman on the bed, and her husband is there claiming that he killed her. I don't know if anybody could be described as composed. But I guess, yes, generally he was composed.
Okay. Who then killed you?
My husband killed me.
Your husband killed you. Okay. No more questions.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay?
All right, since handkerchief is apparently very important, to your knowledge, did you ever know if Desdemona got the handkerchief back?
Prior or after it had been taken?
Yes.
I don't believe she did.
So when you came in to the room and was dying on the bed, there was no handkerchief or anything of that nature in her possession or near her body?
I don't think so, but also I don't think, excuse me, but I don't think at that moment I was really looking for where her handkerchief was.
No, I understand. I was just wondering if you had noticed. So you said when you came to their door that it was locked and that you were trying to get in, making yourself heard. When you were let in, was there anyone in the room besides Desdemona and Othello?
No, it was just the two of them.
And do you have any reason to believe that someone else was in the room between you leaving and coming back in?
No, I don't know.
Okay. And also, when you were talking about Othello was indirect about the question of what had happened to her, do you recall what kind of he said? Like, was he pleading ignorance or?
Yes, I can't remember his exact words, but it wasn't. Later, he said, "'Twas I that killed her." So it would have been something. It was the opposite of that. He seemed, for a moment, I guess, as if he was pleading innocence. But then, following that, he looked at me and said, "'Twas I that killed her."
And you also said that he said something to that effect to, I believe, Desdemona's uncle when they came over. Do you remember?
Yes, after the company, I suppose, had come in, he looked at her uncle and said, he said it was by his hands that she had died. So once again admitting to the fact that he had done it.
And after
cross on these topics?
How long were you in the Army?
We were married for, I suppose at this point, about 8 years.
No more questions.
Thank you so much. You may step down. Any witnesses for the state?
Yes, Your Honor, at this time the state calls Athena Mason to the stand.
Witness's name for the record is what?
Athena Mason.
Ms. Mason, have you been opposed in this case? You understand that you are testifying under oath and that you will be to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Madam Prosecutor, please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Please state your name, spelling the last for the record.
My name is Dr. Athena Mason, that's Mason.
And what's your current occupation?
Well, I'm the head medical examiner for the city of Venice.
Do you have a curriculum vitae to portray your qualifications?
Yes, of course.
Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel what has been marked as State's Exhibit 1. Permission to approach.
Yes.
Dr. Mason, do you recognize this is your curriculum vitae?
Yes, this has all my qualifications on it.
Permission to enter what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit 1 as a full exhibit in evidence?
Any objections? No.
Permission to approach and enter?
Yes.
Dr. Mason,
Sorry, Exhibit 1 is entered into evidence.
Dr. Mason, could you please just describe your qualifications to hold this position?
Sure. So I have a bachelor's in both chemistry and biology from Johns Hopkins, and I stayed at Johns Hopkins to earn my medical degree. After graduating, I decided to go to the Ospedale Civil of Giovanni Apollo to do my fellowship. Afterwards, I got a job as the assistant medical examiner for the city of Venice, and then after a few years, I took over the position head medical examiner.
So why are you here today?
Well, I performed the autopsy on Desdemona.
And were you able to come to any conclusions in this case?
Yes, I was.
And what methods did you use to come to your conclusions?
Well, I did simple observations and blood work and top screens, all very often used in the medical profession.
And these methods are regularly conducted and relied upon in your field?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Now, at this time, the state requests to have Dr. Athena Mason tender as an expert in forensic pathology.
Any cross-examination on her qualifications or objections to her qualification as an expert? The court admits Dr. Athena Mason as an expert in the field of pathology.
All right, so now I'd like to go back and talk about your investigation in this case. What did you do when you arrived on the scene?
Well, first I made a few observations. The victim was lying face up on her marital bed. The blanket seemed very disheveled, and with my experience on crime scenes, it seemed that there was some form of struggle.
And what did you do after leaving the scene?
Well, I took her back to the lab to, once again, examine her under better lighting.
And did you conduct any, or did you document anything in the lab that would aid you in your testimony in this case?
Yes, so I knew she had bloodshot eyes, and she was also had a lack of any lacerations or bruising on her body, and there was also a presence of cyanosis.
First, did you record this anywhere, this information?
Yes, of course, everything's recorded and typed up by my interns.
All right, permission to approach the opposing counsel with State's Exhibit 2. Permission to approach?
Yes.
Dr. Mason, what's this document?
This is a form I have to fill out quite often for the police department. It's a simple coroner's form to tell them what I found and the eventual cause of death.
And is this regularly conducted in your field?
Yes.
And who created this document?
It's created by the government, and then I fill it out on a daily basis.
Permission to have what has been marked as State's Exhibit 2 entered as full exhibit in evidence?
Any objections? No, Your Honor.
Permission to approach and tender?
Yes, ma'am. Exhibit 2 is entered into evidence.
All right, now Dr. Mason, could you just repeat for the court using this document what you witnessed on the body?
Well, as it states here, the external injuries I noticed were bloodshot eyes, a lack of any lacerations or bruising upon the skin, and cyanosis.
And could you just explain to the court exactly what cyanosis is?
Of course. So cyanosis is the presence of blue or purplish tinge to the skin. It shows that there was a lack of oxygen in the body. You usually find it around the mouth, or sometimes even within the mouth on the tongue. And you'll see it at the extremities, so your fingertips or toes. It's present in cases of smothering, strangulation, and even hypothermia.
All right, so what did these findings seem to indicate to you?
Well, generally with the presence of bloodshot eyes and cyanosis, that leads to me beginning to suspect that it was asphyxia that eventually killed her, a lack of oxygen to the body.
So what did you do?
Well, I first had blood work done. See, there's some other cases where even an overdose of certain drugs, most likely heroin, will actually cause very similar symptoms within the body. So I also did an additional tox screen just to rule out any other possibilities.
So what did you find in this blood test?
Well, the blood test showed that, well, first the tox screen came back completely clean. There was nothing irregular. And then the blood test showed that there was high levels of oxygen, or low levels of oxygen and high levels of CO2. Once again, backing up my findings of her dying from lack of oxygen.
All right, so what conclusion did you come to for the Desmona's death?
I eventually came to the conclusion that she died of asphyxiation, most likely due to smothering.
And why do you say that it was most likely due to smothering?
Well, if it was mostly due to smothering with a large soft object, and that's shown by the lack of bruises or lacerations on the body. If someone had been strangled, it would have shown on their neck and bruises, or if they had been smothered with a small or thin object, you would see bruising around the mouth, and most likely a small hairline fraction within the mandible. But none of that was present, so I figured something large and soft, so for example, a pillow would have been used to smother her.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Mason, I have two questions for you. First of all, were you present when the victim's death occurred?
No, I came after. I'm the forensics analyst. I will come after and just saw the body.
And then, in your opinion, is it possible to smother someone from across a room?
No, you would have to be on
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for testimony beyond my witness's knowledge.
This is a rational based fact. Anybody person could tell me if you have to smother someone from being physically injured.
At this point, I then tailor my objection to relevance as to this being a hypothetical, and there's no evidence that anybody's across the room at any time.
I think it's appropriate, Rule 701, layperson testimony, and since it's cross-examination, I'll allow you to proceed with the hypothetical. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you want me to ask a question again? In your opinion, is it possible to smother someone from across a room?
You know, asphyxia by definition is blocking the airways. So unless it was blocked with an object, like say in case of accidental asphyxia, which happens often with small children, where they put something in their mouth and it blocks the airways. But in this case, like I said, it was smothering. For smothering, you have to be present holding it down. You have to actually hold it there until the person dies.
So just clarify for court, you have to hold something until the person dies.
Yes, until they stop breathing.
Thank you. No further questions.
You're correct.
Yes, Your Honor. When smothering an individual, could physical damage be caused?
It depends on how smothering is done. If it's done with a pillow, like in which I thought might happen in this case, then really it's not going to show anything other than the lack of oxygen to the body. However, if it's like a smaller object, then you have partial asphyxiation.
However, Dr. Mason, if someone's airways were to be blocked for an extended period of time and then released just before death, could that person remain conscious for a very brief amount of time afterwards?
It's possible, but at that time, there'd be such damage to the brain and the rest of the body that they'd probably be in coma.
However, would you agree that maybe the lack of an ability to form proper sentences or coherent thoughts could be a signs or the side effects of asphyxiation?
Yes, you would definitely be impaired on all motor functions.
And they would not necessarily be the most coherent, is that what you're saying?
Not at all. There would be brain damage at that point.
However, are you saying that it is possible to remain conscious for a brief amount of time before death?
You could potentially due to the amount of damage caused.
Thank you.
Your cross?
No, Your Honor. I got it.
Mason, thank you. You may step down. Additional witnesses from the state of Venice.
No, Your Honor, at this time, the state rests.
All right, the state having arrested its case, are there any motions on behalf of the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to offer their witnesses.
All right, could the attorneys briefly? A full consideration of the facts. Therefore, I will respectfully deny the defense's motion for a directed verdict. At this point in time, Mr. Defense Attorney, we need to advise your client of his right to testify or his right to invoke his Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination. Could you please bring your defendant before the court? Mr. Othello, you understand that you're the defendant in this matter? And has your attorney advised you of your Fifth Amendment right to testify in your defense or to refrain from any type of compelling of being a witness in your own case?
Yeah.
And have you and your, Mr. Defense Attorney, do you believe that Mr. Othello understands the advice that you've given with regard to this matter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And have you and your client decided whether he will testify on his own behalf?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, if you'd like to call Mr. Othello.
Okay, I understand. Go ahead and take your seat back at behind the defense table, Mr. Othello. All right, the defense's motion for directed verdict having been resolved in the negative, and the defendant having been advised of his Fifth Amendment rights, the defense may now present its first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. We call Othello to the stand.
Mr. Othello, have you been deposed in this case?
I have this.
You understand that you remain under oath in your deposition?
Yes.
And that any testimony you give here today will be considered to be truthful, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay. Please proceed, Mr. Defense Attorney.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Othello. I'm a general information officer.
When did you gain your position as a general information officer?
2 years ago.
Was Iago already in the position of officer at the time?
Yes, he was.
Now, can you describe to us your relationship with Desmond?
Yes. We have a great relationship. She is a very kind, loving, understanding, compassionate, and funny person who I'm very, very proud to call my wife.
How did you two become married?
We eloped.
Okay. I understand that you received a military assignment soon after your elopement. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. The Duke of Venice sent me to Cyprus to aid in defense against the Turkish invasion.
Now, how did that battle go?
Well, it actually didn't happen because the Turkish fleet was destroyed in a storm.
So it was after this that you headed to Cyprus?
Yes.
What was the first thing you did when you arrived in port?
I greeted my wife. It was the most important thing to me at that time. I hadn't seen her for a while, and I made sure she was the first person I went to.
Did everyone celebrate the sinking of the Turkish fleet that night?
Yes, we did.
Did you stay up late?
No, I went to bed early that night. I didn't feel too well.
Did anything interrupt you during your sleep?
Yes, there was a disruption with Michael Cassio.
How did you handle that?
I had to remove him from his post, and I went back to bed.
You said that you weren't feeling well. Were you feeling any better by the next day?
No, I actually had a terrible headache.
Now, did you spend a lot of time with Iago during your time on the island?
I would say a fair amount.
Did you two converse that second day you were on the island?
Yes, we did.
Is there anything that stands out that you can talk about?
Yes. He pointed out to me his suspicions about my wife's unfaithfulness.
How did you respond to these accusations?
Well, I was very upset, and I made sure that if he was going to make such accusations, that he should be positive and sure before he confronts me.
Did you have any plans for your time on the island later that night?
Yes, me and my wife had organized a dinner.
By the time this dinner came around, were you feeling any better?
No, my head by this time was in fact splitting, but Desmond did all she could to help me and took me into the dinner.
What did you do after the dinner that night?
I went to bed.
Now the next day, did Iago talk to you again?
Yes, he did.
How did this conversation go?
Well, it was more about his suspicion of my wife's unfaithfulness.
Did anything happen during this conversation that interrupted it?
Yes, I suffered from a epileptic fit this time.
Could you tell us about this episode that you had?
Yes, I have suffered with epilepsy for quite a long time, since I was a young boy. And my mother was always worried that I had the devil in me. And this has been something that's burdened me for most of my life.
Okay, well, back to the specific episode that happened in your conversation with Iago. About how quickly did you recover from it?
A couple of minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Now, when you regained consciousness, did you two continue your conversation?
We did.
What did Iago talk about to you?
Well, it's all very confusing. The devil is tormenting me.
Specifically, I'm wondering if he offered any proof to the accusations he made earlier.
Yes, he tried to, he showed me a Casio and himself, Iago, discussing my wife's unfaithfulness, and that Casio was involved.
How did you observe this conversation?
I was behind the pillar.
Did this observation lead you to a conclusion? And what was that conclusion?
That it was true.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation. You can't form a conclusion on something that doesn't have personal knowledge to.
Your Honor, we're not putting this forth to say that whether Desdemona had a conclusion, had an affair or not. We just want the court to know Othello's state of mind.
Overruled.
After you had reached this conclusion, what did you do next?
Well, I'm not really sure.
Is there anybody that you confided in?
I went to my wife.
Okay. And how did you speak to her when you came up to her?
I did.
And how did that conversation go?
It didn't really go well.
Can you tell us why?
I was tormented by the devil. And I guess my behavior was very erratic because of that possession. And, yeah.
How did that conversation end?
It didn't end well. I had to leave.
Did you ever return to her?
I did. I did. I came back into her bed chambers that night.
What was your intent in going to see her again?
Well, my intention was to apologize to her because I know from that conversation we just spoke about that she didn't feel well about it. Neither did I, because of the devil. And I had to get to her to let her know that I apologize. I was sorry that it was not my fault.
What was Desmo's condition when you first walked into the room?
She was sleeping.
Did you wake her?
I tried to wake her by kissing her.
What happened after this?
I'm not really sure. It's very confusing. At this time, I fell into a fit. And I could feel it, and I removed myself from her bed. And then I don't remember.
What was the first thing that happened when you regained control of consciousness?
There was screaming at the door, knocking at the door, and it was inevitable.
Did you let her in?
I did.
What did Amelia do when she got inside the room?
She came to me, but I noticed that Desmona was saying something, so I went to her. At this point, I wanted to speak to my wife.
Now, you say that you went to her. Amelia testified that she was the one that went to her bedside.
Mm-hmm.
Which one was it?
I went to her bedside.
Okay. Do you remember anything that Desmona said just before she died?
Well, I had removed myself again from her bed because she seemed to be having a rough time breathing, and it was scary. And to which point Amelia came to the bed, and she told her to commend her to her kind Lord, that she loved me.
How did you react to seeing your wife die?
The worst moment in my life, and I became extremely weak, and I blacked out again.
When did you regain consciousness from this blackout?
Well, I really didn't, because before I knew it, I had found a dagger in my body.
Thank you, no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I please report?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Teller, there are a few gaps in your story. You realize that, right?
I don't think they understand the story.
There were many times on direct examination that you claimed to not remember what happened. Is that right?
Yes, because of blackouts.
Yes, because of blackouts. So let's go back and see if we can maybe fill in some of those gaps right now. The first time I remember you talking about this was during that conversation with Iago early in the day before his murder. Is that right? You claimed to have blacked out early in the day of your wife's murder.
The conversation with Iago?
Yes.
I take it.
You said you had an epileptic fit. Is it safe to assume that this epileptic fit was same to the one that we saw the other day in court?
No, that was not an epileptic fit.
It was not an epileptic fit.
Epilepsy is having a seizure. It's seizing. What you're referring to in court was the devil coming through my body.
All right, so you're now claiming that there's a difference for you between epilepsy and possession?
Yes, epilepsy is a common thing. Several people have it.
Now you said that you've suffered from epilepsy for your entire life, is that right?
Not my entire life. It began as I was a young boy.
As a young boy, at least?
13 years old.
So if you're claiming that you suffered from epilepsy for this long-term duration, this whole possession thing, which you just claimed was different, is new. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
It is not new, as I said before. It is something that was put into my mother's head when I was young, that the devil was inside me. And it has seemed to come up more as we had been on the island.
All right, thank you, fellas. Let's go back to that fit, what happened right afterwards. You said that Cassio entered, is that right? After epileptic fit?
Iago showed me Cassio and having a conversation.
Yes, you hid behind a pillar and listened, is that right?
I hid behind a pillar.
And you thought that you heard evidence of your wife's infidelity, is that right?
No, Iago told me.
And then the conversation that you overheard with Cassio supposedly confirmed that, is that correct?
Well, I saw the conversation first, and Iago confirmed that Cassio and Iago were having a conversation about Cassio carrying on a affair with this time.
All right, so now after Cassio left, you went back out to talk to Iago, is that right?
I did, and in this time I was still really recovering from the fit.
And while you were recovering, do you recall saying, "How shall I murder him, Iago"?
I recall this, I do, but it was, I could feel the devil rising in my body, and these horrible things happened. it came out of my body, and I have no control over it.
All right, so can we let the record reflect that that's the first time you're claiming the devil took over your mind?
That is
That
not
day?
the first time.
That day?
Yes.
All right, I'm just going to actually mark that down right here. You see that? Never mind. All right, so then Cassio wasn't the only person who had some choice words about in that conversation, now was it?
We began to discuss my wife.
Yes, in fact, I believe it was that you said, "Let her rot and perish and be damned tonight, for she shall not live." Do you recall saying that?
That is the devil.
That's the devil. All right. Okay, now, with the devil there in between where you said you were going to kill Cassio and when you were going to kill Desdemona, or did he kind of come and go in that time?
I wouldn't know, you'd have to ask the devil.
All right,
Excuse me, Madam Prosecutor. We cannot observe decorum within this courtroom. I will turn this into a closed proceeding. We understand each other? I thought so. Madam Prosecutor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, before we continue, could you have somebody pass me that bottle of water in my bag? That's something we could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Commissioner Approach?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right, so after you said that your wife shall not live, you asked Iago for poison to poison her, is that correct?
That, once again, is the devil.
All right, now, and at that point, Iago suggested a different method of murder to you, is that correct?
Yeah.
He suggested that you strangled her in her bed.
I would have never done that, no.
All right, thank you, that's not what I asked, though. I simply asked if that was what Iago suggested.
You may have.
All right, thank you. Now, shortly after, Lodovico and Desdemona and a group of spectators entered, is that correct?
They did.
And you greeted them.
Sorry, yeah.
The devil was not possessing you at this time, is that right?
Yes, it was.
Oh, he was. Now you recall giving a deposition in this case, is that right?
I'm sorry?
You recall giving a deposition for this case?
I do recall that, yes.
And you recall saying in that deposition that the devil was not possessing you at that point?
I recall in the deposition saying, if you're referring to the awful strike of my wife, and yes, he was there.
He was there. No, I'm going back to when Lodovico gave you a letter to read. Do you recall reading that letter?
I do, yes. Oh, okay, that instance, yes.
Yes. So the devil was not in your mind when you were casually reading that letter, is that correct?
No, yes, that's correct. No, he was not.
He was not in your mind.
No.
So he left after you finished talking to Iago, is that right?
That's right, that's correct.
And then he came back when Lodovico and Desdemona came in.
Yes.
Just like that.
Once again, I don't have any control over the devil. You have to ask him.
All right, so you were reading this letter and Desdemona and Lodovico were discussing something, is that correct?
Probably so.
But then you grew angry. Sorry.
The devil boiled inside of me.
This is when the devil came back. And that's when you called her a whore, is that right?
Yes, the devil.
The devil, the devil. And then you struck her.
Once again, the devil.
The devil.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, the prosecution is using a single instance throughout this entire case to try to convince the bench that the fellow has a habit of abuse.
If I may be heard, Your Honor, this objection has been raised 3 times and overruled on all 3 occasions.
But, I mean, we can draw our own conclusions. We understand it's a single event. So there's no need to continue that. We understand your objections,
Yes,
still
Your Honor.
noted. But we're going to draw our own conclusions as to whether that's state of mind or not.
Yes, sir.
Proceed, Madam Prosecutor.
Yes, Your Honor. All right, so I'd like to move on to later that evening, and I recognize that this may be difficult. You went in to see your wife before bedtime, is that right?
I went to apologize and kiss her dinner. Yes.
She was sleeping at the time,
She was sleeping.
and you kissed her awake,
Right.
and then you smothered her, is that right?
No.
No.
No, no, no.
No, there was a gap there, is that right?
I never smothered her. No.
Okay, yeah, there was a gap in your memory after you kissed your wife goodnight, is that correct?
That is correct.
But she did wake up, is that right?
She did, yes.
She did wake up, and just to clarify, there was no one else in the room at the time, was there?
When I went into the room, it was me and Destimona.
Just you and Desdemona? Not even Amelia was there?
She came later. I was across the room, and I had also blacked out, and then she was at the door knocking, and I let her in.
Yes, you were across the room after your memory came back, is that right?
I was.
But as you said, there was a very convenient blackout, is that right?
Yes, I left the bed.
So you don't know how long you were actually by that bedside, do you?
Well, yes, I do. I kissed her goodnight, and as I said, with in the direct death, I could feel the devil rising in me, so I left the bed, and then that's when I had fit, and when I came to, Amelia was asking to be let in.
All right, but if you were blacked out, you can't say that you didn't walk back over to the bed now, could you?
I don't see how I could have done that.
You can't walk in a blackout?
No, I would be completely out.
But you just told us that you could speak in a blackout. So some of your muscles work. Is that right?
You have to ask the devil. I was not present. I wouldn't know. I don't know.
So the devil can also control which muscles of your body function and which don't. Is that what you're telling me?
Like I said, I don't know. I'm not the devil.
Okay, so we've established you can talk, but you can't walk. All right. You saying you can't smother either?
I cannot. No,
Can your body in these blackouts, is what I'm asking.
I don't know.
All right, so let's move on to when Amelia came back in. Perhaps you didn't do it to Amelia?
I didn't. No, I didn't kill her. No, no.
But then you said to Amelia it was I that killed her.
The reason I said that was because from the argument we had earlier, I had felt as though that I had broken her heart, and I felt as though at that time that she had died because of what I had said.
So you thought that you killed her with your words, is that right?
That I had broken her heart, that I had made her upset.
Is that what you thought when you told her Uncle Lodovico that it was her whose breath with these hands have just nearly stopped?
No, I didn't say those things. That was the devil.
The devil came back again, is that right? Just keep the tally going. So first, just to clarify, you confessed to the murder to Amelia.
Your Honor,
I
I'd like
did
to
not.
notify the court that we are running over time, and so I understand for clarification purposes, but to continue with moving with the cross.
Okay, can Counsel Fisher finish your point?
Yeah.
And court administration as well. Your Madam Prosecutor, please sum it up for this case.
Yeah, so just for clarification for the record, you first confessed to the murder
did not confess to a murder. I confessed to upsetting my wife.
You said 'twas I that killed her. The devil said 'twas I that.
The devil tormented me and said those things.
Wait, just one more moment. I thought you said that the devil wasn't in your mind when you said 'twas I that killed her. I thought you said that was you.
I said, you're confusing things now. I said to you that I felt as though I had upset my wife, and that I had felt that what I had said to her in argument had made her very upset.
So when you said 'twas I that killed her to Amelia, that was Othello. That was you.
That was me.
All right. But when you later confessed again to her uncle, that wasn't you. Nope, the devil came back again. Just re-entered your body just like that in mid-conversation. All right, thank you. No further questions.
Reiterate.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Step down, Mr. Othello. All right, I believe we need, we're under time constraints today, so we need to rest the afternoon. If counsel for the state and the defense can email the judges after the close of business today and let us know what you anticipate with regard to scheduling next week. That way we can make sure that we can all proceed as efficiently as possible. All right? All right with that? Okay. Beyond that, we'll be in recess. Thanks so much.